Reprise du débat, l'honorable secrétaire parlementaire du Premier ministre.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. It's an honor for me to speak in favor of the ratification of the historic Paris Agreement, one that sets the stage, really, for the world to come together to meet the challenges posed by climate change and displays a level of leadership on this file not seen in far too long, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as someone who spent a good portion of my life working in the climate field, educating Canadians on the science and solutions to the climate crisis, I'm proud to count myself amongst the members of this government who are working towards meeting this multi-generational challenge. I'm proud, Mr. Speaker, because this government understands that the Paris Agreement, although historic, was simply the beginning to something much larger. Indeed, it was among the first key steps in this government's plan to meet this challenge, and many steps have been taken since then by our government, under the leadership of our Prime Minister, our Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and our Minister of Natural Resources. The data is in, Mr. Speaker, and the facts speak for themselves. Here in Canada, we're already seeing the impacts of climate change and a changing climate. We're seeing thawing permafrost, coastal erosion, the arrival of new diseases, as well as more frequent extreme events like flooding, droughts, and heat waves. Homeowners in flood-prone areas have already borne serious losses, as we've seen from events in Alberta, Toronto, and elsewhere. And the 2016 Parliamentary Budget Officer report tells us that Canadian insurers have paid at least $1 billion per year in claims for losses resulting from weather events in the last 6 years alone. Seniors are also living with increased heat advisory days. Young Canadians are experiencing increased asthma diagnoses. And Canadians, in general, are experiencing hardships posed by a changing climate, and the examples go on and on. Changes in climate that we're seeing now are the result of past and present emissions and are already locked in. And so, Mr. Speaker, even if we were to cut our emissions to zero tomorrow, the climate would continue to change because of the lag between our actions and the lifespan of those emissions in the atmosphere. And that, Mr. Speaker, is one of the main reasons why action is urgent. So, Mr. Speaker, 6 months ago we began, as we promised Canadians we would, by consulting with them. With the momentum of the Paris Climate Agreement talks, our government began these consultations by meeting with provinces and territories, and together we released the Vancouver Declaration, and with it launched a national conversation about how Canada should address the climate crisis. Our government understands the importance of meeting with international commitments that we made in Paris. We also know that leading our country through a transition to a stronger, more resilient, low-carbon economy will ultimately improve our quality of life here in Canada. And as such, early on in our mandate, a concrete plan for a pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change began to be developed, a framework that was reflected in our first budget, I may add, and one that is outlines investments in green infrastructure, green jobs, science and technologies, and much more. Further, Mr. Speaker, it outlined direct investments in adaptation and mitigation, and this latter point is especially important, particularly for those communities most at risk in the northern regions of our country. While strong mitigation actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions can help us avoid unmanageable situations in the future, strong adaptation measures will ensure that we manage the unavoidable impacts we're currently facing and will continue to face moving forward. Adaptation and mitigation aren't either-or choices, Mr. Speaker. Both are equally important and demand action. And there's already considerable work being underway all across the country to adapt to the changing climate. In Budget 2016, our government committed $129 million to build the science base to inform decision-making, protect the health and well-being of Canadians, to build resilience in the North and in our Indigenous communities, and to ensure and to enhance the competitiveness of key economic sectors. We've also made significant commitments to renewing Canada's infrastructure and protecting Canada's communities from the impacts of climate change. Now, adaptation isn't just about newer or bigger or stronger physical infrastructure. It's also about how we as Canadians live resilient lives and live in resilient communities. It's the decisions that we make about where and how we live, how we run our businesses, and how we support our neighbours. It's also about relationships with Indigenous peoples. Indigenous communities have strongly expressed to us that climate change threatens their very physical, cultural, and social well-being, and even survival. It is clear, Mr. Speaker, that climate change impacts touch every region and sector of our country, including the North. And our government is working alongside Inuit governments, the United States, Sweden and Finland to finalize a governance model focusing on the resilience of the Arctic states, Indigenous peoples and communities, and the ecosystems on which they depend. The federal government is once again, Mr. Speaker, a partner. And Mr. Speaker, we're working with all orders of government, Indigenous peoples, the private and not-profit sectors, and academia, strengthening our ability to make prudent decisions. Because our government recognizes that in mobilizing other governments, stakeholders, and Canadians to tackle this challenge, we're protecting our people, our communities, our assets, our economy, and our environment from inevitable impacts. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, our government also recognizes that adapting to climate change comes with a host of other significant benefits. Things like cleaner air, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, enhanced biodiversity, more vibrant public spaces, and a strengthened social fabric. Our government is committed to working with all Canadians to make Canada stronger, more resilient, and more prosperous. And in addition to these historic steps that we've already taken, the latest step of putting a price on carbon is crucial, Mr. Speaker, and is one that will help Canada meet its commitments outlined in the Paris Agreement. Ça va aider notre gouvernement, Monsieur le Président, à créer une économie plus propre et plus innovatrice qui réduit les émissions et protège notre environnement, tout en créant des emplois bien rémunérés pour la classe moyenne et pour ceux qui travaillent fort pour s'y joindre. Un prix de référence pour le carbone, tel qu'annoncé, nous permettra de respecter nos cibles de réduction de GES, tout en offrant certitude et prévisibilité pour les entreprises. Après des décennies d'inaction et des années d'occasions ratées, nous prenons finalement les mesures nécessaires pour protéger notre planète pour nos enfants et nos petits-enfants. Nous mettons l'accent sur des mesures réelles, concrètes et durables pour réduire nos émissions et faire croître notre économie. Notre approche, Monsieur le Président, de tarification de la pollution permettra d'assurer que toutes les administrations au Canada adopteront une tarification de la pollution au carbone d'ici 2018. 80% des Canadiens vivent déjà dans une administration où la pollution par le carbone a un prix. Mais d'autres mesures sont nécessaires et il est important d'avoir une tarification de la pollution à l'échelle du pays. Chaque province et territoire aurait la possibilité de décider comment mettre en œuvre la tarification du carbone en imposant directement un prix sur le carbone ou en adoptant un système de plafonnement et d'échange. Elle donnera au Canada un avantage dans l'établissement d'une économie axée sur une croissance propre et elle aidera les entreprises canadiennes à être plus innovatrices et plus compétitives. Les Canadiens savent, Monsieur le Président, que la tarification de la pollution favorisera l'innovation et la création des nouvelles possibilités d'emploi stimulant pour la classe moyenne au Canada. Les citoyens de ma circonscription de Vaudreuil-Soulanges et les Canadiens d'un bout du pays à l'autre savent que la réduction de nos émissions de GES permettra d'accroître la compétitivité de notre économie et d'assurer la croissance durable de celle-ci. So, Mr. Speaker, let's just take a moment to ask and even answer some of the key questions that may be posed regarding the ratification of the Paris Agreement, our plan to meet the challenges of climate change, and meet our commitments set forth in the Paris Agreement. In the process, Mr. Speaker, it may allow me to debunk some of the assertions that have been put forth by some honourable members of Her Majesty's loyal opposition. First, will this plan take the money out of provinces? The answer, Mr. Speaker, is no. No matter how hard they try to say otherwise, the money and all revenues received from the price on carbon will be given back to each province, and they will decide how these funds should be spent. Second, will this help us reach our GHG reduction goals? The answer, simply put, is yes. Pricing pollution is one of the most efficient ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to reach our objective to protect the environment and create a clean growth economy. Third, will the ratification of the agreement and our plan to meet our obligations under it create opportunities for Canadians? And the answer is yes. Through market incentives created by putting a price on carbon, our investments in green infrastructure, investments in public transportation, as well as investments in scientific technologies New and exciting job prospects will be realized that will be well-paying jobs and will grow the economy and help the middle class and those working hard to join it. And in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I just want to add the following. In addition to the economic opportunities and health security benefits just presented, Mr. Speaker, this is simply what we as members of Parliament have been called here to do. Canadians have been calling for action on climate. The majority support putting a price on carbon. They understand that the implications of inaction far outweigh the implications of action.